What message would Deepak Chopra share to the world leaders and future shapers attending Davos in a world fueled by fame and a ruthless pursuit towards the top? Well, this is the question I had the immense opportunity to ask him, going really deep into the spiritual codes of success and the responsibilities we each have in elevating our collective consciousness as we pursue our respective paths. We interviewed Deepak during his first time here at Davos a couple of years ago, and with him coming back during the World Economic Forum, which kicks off next week, this feels like the perfect moment to finally release the special conversation from our treasure vault. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We are joined on stage by a man who needs no introduction, but perhaps the meaning of his name gives us the biggest insight into his essence. Deepak is the holder of light, the symbol of a bright future, which couldn't be more relevant to the work that you manifest for millions of people around the world. So thank you for joining us, Deepak. We're truly honored to welcome you into our space.
Thank you. It's lovely to be with you.
So we would love to talk to you about the spiritual codes of success. Many of us in this room are extremely ambitious, but also guided very much by our spirituality and our culture. So what are some of the spiritual laws that have transcended time and that you believe are universal truths?
First of all, it's important to understand what we mean when we say spiritual, because the word is subject to many interpretations. For me, the word spiritual can be expressed in one phrase: self-awareness. Okay, so we're not talking about the mind, which is a modified expression of what we call the self. Self is fundamental reality, fundamental being. We call ourselves human beings, not human thinkings, or not human doings, but human beings. So, right now as you're listening to me, if you were just try this, as you're listening to me, be aware of that which is listening. So that still presence that you experience is the self, it's not the mind. It's what we call I. I was 4 years old, I was 10 years old, I was 15 years old, I was a teenager, young adult, all the way to dusty death. The body is a changing experience in I. The mind is a changing experience in I. The world is a changing experience in I. But I is a constant. So I is the non-changing factor in every experience. What is that and where is that has been a great mystery to science. It still is. Because I doesn't have a form. If it had a form, you could see it. I can see you. I can even guess what you're thinking through your facial expressions, but I can't see you at the most fundamental level, except as a presence, period. So I has no form, and because it has no form, it has to be infinite. Anything that has its form, doesn't matter. The Milky Way galaxy has a border. The universe, even now, has a border. It's 47 billion light years away from us. But anything that doesn't have a border has to be infinite, which means I is infinite, which means it's not subject to birth or death. It's never born, it's never gone. But the experiences are born, body, mind, world. So when you say laws, number one, it's infinite. Number two, it's formless. Number three, it's without cause, because anything that has a cause has a beginning and an end. It's fundamental, it's irreducible, and it's infinite possibilities, it's also infinite creativity, it's also infinite correlation, which these days we call synchronicity. It's unpredictable. If I asked you, what's your next thought going to be? You don't know. So it's unpredictable, and the unpredictability is the basis of its creativity. It's not an algorithm. And it's the source of our, what we call attention and intention, but unfortunately that is filtered through our conditioned, divided mind. So attention, intention are very weak unless we transcend the mind. I hope that answers your question.
Well, we dove straight in, but no, absolutely, a lot of food for thought to reflect upon. And so when we talk about success, of course, it comes in many forms and it means something different to each one of us. But how can we recognize it and celebrate it without feeding the ego and developing an unhealthy relationship between money and ambition?
A very simple definition of success would be it's the progressive realization of worthy goals, number one. Number two, it's the ability to love and have compassion. And number three, it is always to be connected to your creative source. If I was to use one word for it, it's joy. Joy is the ultimate measure of success. If you have joy, then you'd have no problems, by definition. The joy is success. Not happiness, joy. Happiness is the opposite of sadness. It's a mental state. Joy is our fundamental state of being. We see it in a baby. Unless it's wet or hungry, when it says, then if the mother gives its attention, it's back to its original state of joy, innocence.
Yes, the preservation of innocence and curiosity is something that I think is lost upon many people when they get caught in the traps of day-to-day life. But naturally, with success comes failure, and actually those are the building blocks of success in a way. But what comes with that is stress, naturally. And so how can we navigate that in a peaceful and healthy way that it doesn't affect many people around us with that burden on the shoulders?
So stress is not a spiritual experience, it's a mental experience. And stress is the perception of threat, whether it's physical threat, psychological threat, financial threat, whatever. It's a perception. And therefore it's a mental event. And it results from what we call resistance to existence, anticipation of the future or regret of the past. If I ask you right now, in this moment, what's wrong with this moment? The answer is nothing, unless you think about it. Then, of course, you start thinking about it. So stress is, therefore, the mental event that we call a thought that creates a subject-object split. This is me, that's you, that's the world. But in reality, it's all one experience. There's no me, there's no you. The universe is differentiating into this experience. How do we manage it? Well, these days, so much understanding. Meditation, mindfulness. Mindfulness means being aware without judgment of things like thoughts or emotions or feelings or sensations or perceptions, or mindfulness of mental space, mindfulness of perception, mindfulness of the body. In yoga, something called pratyahara, which is introspection, mindfulness of what's happening in your body. And today we also have technologies that allow you to accelerate this experience, whether it's VR, augmented reality, immersive experiences. But there are other ways which we've forgotten: music, poetry, dance, of course, mind-body coordination, vagal stimulation, martial arts, play. In our world today, I don't see, when I was growing up, it was a different era. Even teen years were full of amazing adventure and curiosity and wonder and idealism, which we lost, unfortunately. Ultimately, everybody does. But in today's world, I don't see many people actually playing. But if they play, it's a game, competition, or sports with the idea of winning, but not play for the sake of play.
And having play without any time boundaries, and allowing a deep flow state to emerge from that play in nature. It's very true. And I'd like to ask you, we're here in Davos today. What pillars do you want leaders to reflect upon from your work?
I think as I see current leadership, we have to be honest, both in the business world and in the political world. Leadership is full of cronyism, influence peddling, corruption, bureaucracy, control, manipulation. Please excuse me for saying this, but across the world I see most political leaders, even business leaders, as gangsters. And we have to transcend that. The future of leadership belongs to the youth. And I think there is enough idealism right now in our young people, and also, fortunately, enough skepticism about current leadership that the younger demographic can aspire to greatness, which is what leadership should be. It's about deep listening, it's about deep caring, it's about having a vision that we all share, it's about spiritual and emotional bonding, it's about expanding our awareness into domains of intuition, insight, creativity, higher consciousness, integrity, authenticity, responsibility. It's of course about actualizing our dreams, but it's also empowering each other. It's not about I'm the leader and you're the follower, and that in itself is very, it's very unnatural to think that way. Leaders and followers. Leaders have teams, and good teams are emotionally and spiritually bonded. They leverage and accentuate and magnify each other's strengths. Their effective ecosystems include maximum diversity. So a great leadership team would have maximum diversity of ethnicity, of race, of education. It would include philosophers, poets, entertainers, people from the academic world, science, technology. You bring it all together, maximum diversity, shared vision, emotional and spiritual bonding, and then magic happens. But that's the kind of leadership we need now. It's critical, otherwise our current leadership is leading us to extinction, honestly.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it's on all of us as the next generation of leaders to shift that energy by doing the work, by being non-negotiable with our habits, to have that time and space to develop and serve the other people that we lead. Do you believe that a period of isolation caused by a global lockdown has sort of helped humanity connect with their spiritual essence because they've, in a way, had to face themselves for such a long time? And how do you think that this then maybe global conscious awakening may have impacted the world at large?
Well, during the lockdown, some things became very obvious. While we were isolated in our so-called cages at home, nature was celebrating. Birds were singing in Hyderabad. You could see the Himalayas from 400 miles away. People could breathe in places like Bangalore. Fish were returning to dead waters. Even in Venice, you saw fish. And you could see the stars at night. So, in a way, nature was sending us a message. Humans, when you come back from your cages, come back with a little less hubris and a little more humility, because you're the ones responsible for climate change. And climate change is not just itself an isolated issue. It's connected to social justice. It's connected to the pandemic and the mutations. It's connected to mass migrations. It's connected to all kinds of inequality. And it's connected to violence. And so climate change is a very holistic experience if we understand that A, we have technologies to reverse it, but B, some of our language is alienating. You say me and the world, me and the universe. But in fact, the trees are your lungs. The oceans and rivers are your circulation. The earth is recycling as your body. Trees didn't breathe, you wouldn't breathe. And we share one air. That's why, the pandemic spreads so fast. That doesn't respect boundaries, which are artificial constructs. Every boundary is an artificial construct. So one thing is the pandemic taught us what it means to be part of an ecosystem of life, of existence. Second thing, some people were very creative. I mean, look at all the technologies that blossomed, including Zoom and other ways of communicating with each other. The new vaccines that were created through RNA technology now offer hope for vaccines for cancer and other diseases. And so in a way, I think the lockdown did bring more awareness if we are conscious and creative. Then the lockdown has many, many messages to deliver us. Most importantly, we are not divided or isolated. What we do to the other, we do to ourselves.
What was your biggest takeaway from your period of isolation?
My best takeaway was that we all need periods of silence, and silence is the best way to refresh your spirit, resurrect your soul, and reinvent your body and the world.
And talking about key takeaways, what have been some of the key takeaways for you this week in Davos?
I see a lot of creativity. I see a lot of diversity. I still see the old elitism. I've actually stayed away from Davos throughout the years, despite the fact that, it gets a lot of attention worldwide. But it is elitist. I think we have to agree on that. But this year, the flavor has been different. I mean, conversations like this, and the introduction of the psychedelic conversation, and also many other conversations that look at beyond our narcissistic, self-absorbed ideologies.
So what enticed you to come back or come this year, having stayed away?
I think, what enticed me to come? Yeah. This is my first time here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, oh, wow. And I came because of Finnish flows and their whole effort in the direction of what's always been my dream, a critical mass of conversation and awareness for a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier and joyful world.
Fantastic. Well, we welcome you all to the mountains, and I hope you can share that this is one of the most creative spaces that we're building here in the mountains that will outlive not just this week, but a long-lasting vision that we have. So I'd love to open up the floor for any questions that we might have. Tessie over there on the second row has a question.
Hello, thank you so much, Dr. Chopra. You're extremely inspiring, and I have done your meditation practices for years now. So, as a mother of 4, you have met my youngest, Theodore, who is 8 months, at Finnish Flow. I have 3 teenagers, and they do not like to meditate, and being still is absolutely impossible. So how can I, as a mother, because I know it's so important to really ground yourself and meditate. I have learned it after a really big burnout. How can I instill a mindfulness practice into their lives so that I can kind of maybe even prevent a burnout later in life that I had? So any feedback on that, that would be so kind, because I tried so many things and it's impossible to just get them to meditate. For them, they think it's not cool, they are bored, they laugh about it, all of these excuses. What would you say?
Okay,
thank you.
So what we do know is that emotional development begins very early in life. And so in the first 3 or 4 years of life, if a baby gets what I call attention, undivided attention, which means deep listening, affection, deep caring, appreciation, noticing their strengths, and acceptance, not trying to change them, then they start to grow up in a way that emotional development unfolds spontaneously. And it kind of, by the age of 8 years, it is almost complete. And if they don't get that, then it freezes around 8 years, and then you can run for president in the United States. Okay. Now, when it comes to teens, a lot of it, the teenage behavior depends on what happened in the first few years of life. But in any case, teenage is very turbulent, right? Because there are hormonal changes going on. There's a deep shift in how our brain works. And so adolescence is a time of turbulence, and it is there notwithstanding what happened in the earlier years. If you try to force your children to meditate, they will resist it. Okay? What you resist will persist, and what they resist will also persist. I can think now, these days, introducing them to gaming technologies, introducing them to VR. This is something that we're doing at our foundation, using VR, using augmented reality, using immersive experiences. We now have a program that's being released soon through the Lighthouse producers that created the Van Gogh experience. So without a headset, you can go to the museum and you can experience literally what would be called a meditation experience. So instead of forcing them, introduce them to some of the new technologies. At this moment, that's my only recommendation.
Thank you, Dr. Chopra. My name is Victor Pineda, and I worked for many years in two areas. One area is on improving the rights of persons with disabilities and helping to negotiate a UN agreement convention. And the other area is on building cities. And so I helped with the Dubai master plan and things like this. So I do have two questions for you. In the work that you've done with leaders and with people, and your teachings has helped me quite a lot, I was wondering if you had a perspective on the human condition and evolving consciousness around understanding disability and people with disabilities in our society. That's one question. And the second question is, if you were to build your ideal city, what would it look like? Thank you.
Okay, so the first question is, one of the greatest heroes in the whole world of disabilities is Tim Shriver. And his work is extraordinary when it comes to actually enhancing the capacities of disabled people. The second thing that comes to mind right now is that if you look at some of the work that's being done at MIT Media Lab for disabled people, again, it's extraordinary. Right now there are technologies being developed which would give you the ability of bionic limbs and the ability to actually move without that wheelchair. These technologies are emerging. They need a lot more financial support, but I was recently with the people from MIT Media Lab who have actually enhanced the capacity of people with disabilities. And this is going to happen, along with the social movements that are championed by people like Tim Shriver. He's from the Kennedy family, and he's devoted his life to disability. And as far as the future of cities, Finnish Laws has done a lot of conversation around this. during this week, and I would suggest that you look that up. But the future of cities certainly has to have a place for disabled people, and making disability a priority in designing cities and ecosystems, and also bringing back some of what we call nature and rewilding the cities.
But my question was, what would be your principles if the Chopra Foundation would collect a series of mayors? What principles would you give mayors?
What principles?
Principles for mayors.
For mayors?
Yeah, to build cities.
Yeah, of course, we are talking to mayors right now. I'm engaged with the mayor of New York, the mayor of Beverly Hills, and the mayor of New York as well. And there are many principles. One is, of course, if you look at the zip code in the United States, you can correlate everything with the zip code, including illness, what's happening with COVID, violence, crime, etc. And the zip code reflects everything from social injustice to economic status. So your question is very broad-based. We have to do many, many things with the mayors, and there is a movement in the United States that's bringing all the mayors together for these principles: social and economic justice, peace. We have a program in Queens, in New York, where introducing meditation, yoga, has actually reduced the crime rate by 98% in this particular precinct of Queens in New York. And former gangster leaders are now actually the spiritual leaders of this community. So there's a lot to do, and there's no one person or no one organization can do it. We have to collectively work on this effort, and of course enhancing the capacity of disabled people and also bringing out some of their very unusual talents is definitely a priority.
Why don't you pick?
Oh, it's so difficult. So right here in the middle, please.
All right, thank you, Deepa. You said in the beginning that you mentioned the topic of psychedelics. And like you, this was my first time here in Davos, and I didn't expect that the topic of psychedelics will be so prominent in the promenade. So my question to you is, what do you think is the role of psychedelics in the development of human consciousness?
First of all, there's no single panacea for anything. So if you think of psychedelics as a panacea for all the problems of the world, I think that would be mistaken. On the other hand, psychedelics have been used for thousands of years to enhance what we call awareness and go beyond what we call the divided mind. And now we are beginning to understand how they work. So psychedelics decrease the activity of a part of the brain called the default mode network, which is the neural correlate of our ego identity. So they go beyond our ego identity. They also do something to what is called the connectome in the brain, which is what gives us our identity as isolated, divided minds. They enhance the activity of 5-hydroxytryptamine receptors in the brain. They reduce inflammation, and they're found to be effective in chronic illness, chronic physical disease, but also mental disorders, suicidal ideation, and also giving people what we call a transcendent experience. They've been used since biblical times. If you read the hymns of the Rig Veda, there are hymns to Soma, which is probably psychedelic. We don't know what it was, but there are many references to the elixir of joy, which is also produced naturally, by the way, when we experience transcendence. The essential religious experience has three things: finding your identity beyond space-time, the transcendent experience that goes beyond self-actualization, which we call self-transcendence, the emergence of Platonic values like truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, and the loss of the fear of death, because you find the transcendent self, which is not in space-time. And psychedelics have a role. That's all I can say in this brief comment.
Take the lady in orange, please.
You've created an incredible impact over your life so far. You've touched many souls. What are your lessons from spiritual leadership? How much ego does it take? What are your recommendations for younger people who have a calling to create positive impact on the world?
Well, the wisdom traditions have something very profound to say about how do you create an ecosystem of well-being and healing. Using Eastern words, but I can explain them. So what I'm saying to you is very Buddhist. And it says, take refuge in the Buddha, which doesn't mean the person Buddha, but higher consciousness, going beyond personal identity into collective consciousness. Take refuge in the Buddha. Take refuge in the Sangha. Sangha is the community of sentient beings. And take refuge in the Dharma, meaning, purpose in life, and keep asking yourself, how do I serve? How do I help? Simplistically, those are the principles.
The lady at the third row.
Anywhere.
Well, thank you so much. I'm also deeply influenced. My name is Dalia Feldheim. I spent 21 years in the corporate world. And after dealing with bullying at work, etc., I actually changed my mission very in line with to bring more spirituality into the corporate world. You know, teaching positive psychology in the university, in the corporate. We know the corporate world is dying. We know employees are stressed, overworked, etc. And, you know, we created a game, an online, to bring play into the workplace. What would be your key advice? Because I feel like we're in a crisis, major crisis. We need to solve it in the next, there's a lot of crises out there, but the mental health crisis is probably the one that's burning on my heart. What would be your, key advice on how we can accelerate this transformation of bringing spiritual leadership? And, yoga and meditation is one of them. I'm also a yoga teacher, but I feel like there's such a huge gap between, making ROI, return on interaction, not return on investment. So I'd love to get just your key thoughts on bringing spirituality into the corporate world.
As far as mental well-being is concerned, the Chopra Foundation, which is a non-profit 501c3 in the United States, has a global movement called Never Alone. And you might want to check it out, www.neveralone.love. I'll repeat that, www.neveralone.love. We started this movement after I met an actress who has a career in England, France. She comes from Mauritius, has an Indian background in Bollywood and Hollywood. And her sister, younger sister, who was a recording artist, died from suicide. And so she became interested in Buddhism for a while. And after we met her, we created this thing called neveralone.love. And we started with creating an artificial intelligence chatbot called Peewee. And Peewee was the name of the young recording artist who died from suicide, her sister. But now Peewee also stands people interacting with intention. And Peewee is a chatbot. In teens, suicide is now the second most common cause of death. But across the world, every 40 seconds, somebody is dying from suicide. Last year, more people died from suicide in Japan than from COVID-19. And we're not addressing it in the way it should be addressed, because we have so many other problems, COVID, stress, financial crisis. But right now we are taking PV into Arabic, into Hindi, into Urdu to serve the India, Pakistan, Middle East area. We want to take her into multiple languages. She has intervened in 6,000 suicide attempts. Teens are more comfortable talking to a machine than to a human being because they don't feel judged. She's interacting with 16, 20 million people at the same time. We are trying to upgrade her capacities, but she's not the solution. Ultimately, you need human interaction. So behind the scene, we are now organizing counselors. And because of today's blockchain and crypto, we're also developing tokens for Never Alone. So it's a work in progress, but I would like all of you to join Never Alone. And our principles are those 4 things: attention, affection, appreciation, and acceptance, so no one feels ever alone. Now, as far as corporate well-being is concerned, a lot of good research on this from Gallup, where I serve as a senior advisor, scientific advisor. So in the corporate setting, there are some very clear indicators of what can be done to improve the corporate situation. It's not just meditation and yoga. It's more than that. Of course, meditation, yoga, and all that play a big role. But here is some very interesting data that you'll find interesting. If a supervisor or a manager ignores their subordinate, their disengagement is about 40%. If instead of ignoring them, they criticize them, the disengagement falls to 20%. You would rather be criticized than ignored, because now you exist. Okay? But if you notice a single strength in a worker, the disengagement falls to less than 1%. So with this data now, the movement in the corporate world is identify everyone's strengths, notice them, acknowledge them, and create teams where people actually leverage each other's strengths. And there's a way to do it. And then, of course, those principles: shared vision, emotional and spiritual bonding, maximum diversity, and then everything improves. Right now, in the United States, it's estimated that we lose about $300 billion from disengaged people in the workforce, and also what we call actively disengaged people. Actively disengaged means you're unhappy, but you come to work to make other people unhappy as well. So this is a big issue, and what they're changing the word corporate well-being to purpose-driven well-being, number one. But it's also connected to social well-being, it's connected to financial well-being, it's connected to physical well-being, and connected to financial well-being. You can't separate all of them. So that's a very brief summary of what should be done. You can't ignore financial well-being because, even though money adds only 10-12% to your happiness equation every day, when you ask people what they stress about money. And so you have to address that too in the corporate world, that is, people feel financially secure. I have a lot more to say about this, but that's a brief kind of glimpse into what could be happening in the corporate world.
We have time for one more question. So the gentleman at the near the speakers, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Excuse me. We've been talking a lot these last couple of days and maybe not listening enough. I'm with the Mental Health Impact Investment Fund called Masawa. We're investing and catalyzing founders who are ensuring that we as humans can be a bit more mentally well, and not just for financial returns, but also for social returns. We think and we know it's important that the capital isn't just deployed, that it's also nurtured. My question for you, specifically around this, is with the increased amount of consciousness, interconnectedness, awareness of the importance of having the own inner journey, and the ability for capital to drive innovation forward, what do you think specifically is missing?
I think what is missing is cooperation instead of competition. There's a lot of talent, there's a lot of creativity, and today creativity can be harnessed collectively. I use a process for creativity that I used as a physician initially. It's a 9-step process where you first have an imagined outcome through the 5 senses. Then you have what we call information gathering around the problem that is being addressed. Information analysis as the 3rd step. 4th step is incubation through meditation and mindfulness practices collectively. 5th step is the aha insight. 6th step is inspiration. Next is implementation. Next is integration. And the final step is incarnation. Death of the old story and resurrection or the disruption that we call a new story, new context, new meaning, new purpose, and new way of dealing with relationships. I used to use this as a process in treating patients with other doctors because no 2 patients actually respond in the same way to the same treatment for the same disease. And even healing is a creative process. But then I started using this in harnessing creativity amongst business people, and now the same process in, the family offices need to work together to say, how can we collectively harness our collective creativity so that we can all join in what is called healing. And healing is a big word, but it simply means the return to wholeness. It means healing, holy, health, and wholeness are the same word. And holiness is not some kind of self-righteous morality, which is just jealousy with a halo and usually cunning hypocrisy. Holiness means including everybody. So that's my short answer.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for being a part of our experience here today in Davos, for closing the Land Space Summit with your incredible energy, which really we believe is here to transcend and shift the next generation of leaders, of which many of us are in the room today. So thank you again, Dr. Chopra. Hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed having this conversation. If you want to grab a copy of today's show notes, then head over to missionmakers.com, where you'll also find notes from all of our previous episodes. And if you're interested in talking to me about future opportunities at Davos, producing podcasts, or coming down to some of our music and motorsports events, then you can reach out to me at missionmakers or at dj.n1nja on Instagram. Thank you as ever for listening, and until next time, keep it laser focused.